So turning now to my timeline on the evolution of Namaskara-based Vinyasa yoga, which stretches over 1,000 years of uncharted yoga history, I'm now going to show evidence for the ancient roots of Surya Namaskara, particularly the 12-part classic series of Surya Namaskara, 12 poses, which was celebrated particularly this year on International Yoga Day, now in its second year, commemorated by the United Nations and sponsored by India. International Yoga Day has received on the summer solstice record-breaking gatherings, millions gathering to celebrate Vinyasa-based yoga, that is to say, the same yoga revived by Krishnamacharya in the Mysore school, and based on the core sequence of Surya Namaskara as the ancient heritage of India. And this was celebrated as such by millions worldwide, of course, not just in India itself. And this year the focus was on that base sequence, Surya Namaskara, and led to this wonderful commemorative stamp series, which honors Surya Namaskara as the foundational practice of all of yoga. And as I say, this depicts the 12 poses led by the classic seed mantras, the solar seed mantras, that is taught by Krishnamacharya, as well as the Bihar school. Going back to 1950, we have here the Encyclopedia of Indian Culture, edited by D.C. Majumdar, I believe of Maharashtra. And here we see also a 12-part Surya Namaskara practice, which he claims comes from ancient texts. And the poses are not given the familiar names that we know today, like downward facing dog or cobra pose, but rather they're all called Dands, which is the Hindi shortening of the Sanskrit term Danda or Dandavat as a sequence. Danda means a bending pose, not a push-up pose, although there of course are parallels made to, rough equivalents of Western practice. But this is clearly believed by Majumdar and claimed to be ancient, and pivots on the core pose of Ashtanga Namaskara. This is the name of the pose given to the whole practice as well. Sometimes what we call Surya Namaskara, according to Majumdar, is also called the Ashtanga Namaskara, that prostration pose where 8 body parts, Ashta Anga, come to the ground. The question is this an ancient practice? Well, of course, this practice was introduced by Krishnamacharya as well. And if we go back just a little bit further, we see here his panel, Krishnamacharya's system of Vinyasa-based yoga, which was nuanced from 7 particular tantric works, I believe, that are found amongst 27 texts listed in his preface as sources for what he called a yoga revival, not a yoga invention or fabrication. Krishnamacharya in the Mysore school is now charged with fabricating the yoga that is now practiced by hundreds of millions of people worldwide, Vinyasa-based yoga, particularly by writers belonging to the new academic Western field of modern yoga studies, as it's called. So this claim that all of modern postural yoga that has come out of Krishnamacharya's school, that which was celebrated by millions of people on International Yoga Day, including Surya Namaskara as well as other practices, all of this was fabricated or at least based upon Western models of gymnastics and wrestling. This, incidentally, is a fear Krishnamacharya has in his book, and that's why he provides these sadly overlooked sources. I found in 6 of, that should say, his 27 sources, all of which are found in this timeline. 6 of these sources are tantras that have dozens of namaskara practices, hundreds and hundreds of asanas, and basically vindicate Krishnamacharya's claim as to the authenticity of this yoga being ancient. So we go back a little bit further, or actually quite a bit further, tracing whatever evidence we have. Is there any sign of this 12-part Surya Namaskara described by Majumdar as based on a core pose called Ashtanga Namaskara, a 12-part Surya Namaskara that is led by the classic seed mantras of the sun, Hrang, Hring, Hrung, etc.? Do we have evidence for this? We have overwhelming evidence for this. If one just takes a moment to research these tantras, learn how to decode some of their cryptic language, the evidence is abundant. So I take you back then to Maharashtra, same region as Majumdar lived, to about 1000 AD, back through all these different traditions, each one of which has a full Namaskara yoga practice, if not many. And we wind up here at the Virashaivas. The Virashaiva Tantras then composed roughly as a corpus around 1000 AD, including the Ajita Tantra, the Sukshma Tantra, Vatula, the Makuta, the Amshuvati, or Amshu for short. These are all tantras which give detailed namaskara specifics and in particular describe them as categories of dandas or dandavats, exactly as Majumdar describes, and still in the same sequence with the same mantras as taught by Krishnamacharya, and which have come down to us through other close to modern teachers, all of which has been denied as an inauthentic practice that does not have ancient Indian roots. Well, here are the Indian roots. And so we see that these namaskara practices are summarized by the legendary Virashaiva saint of Maharashtra or perhaps Karnataka, and that is Nilakanta Shivacharya in his famous work, famous to the Virashaivas, called the Kriyasara. This is composed between 1350 and 1450 AD and contains some of the first evidence compiled by any human author as to the namaskara sequencing that we've inherited today. Citing from Virashaiva Tantras, he vindicates the claim of India on International Yoga Day that this is indeed an ancient practice. And so now we turn to the Virashaiva to look at this Virashaiva work, to look at specifically what Nilakanta gives us in terms of what namaskara looked like then. This is our ancient yoga heritage. Before we dive into the Kriyasara's teaching on Surya Namaskara, in a text that was composed probably in the late 14th or 15th century, as mentioned, we jump ahead once more to the 20th century and a particular publication that came out in 1928, written by the Raja or King of Ayund, a small province also in Maharashtra. His name specifically Pandit Pratinidhi, who wrote The 10-Point Way to Health. By 10-point, he means 10 poses, 10 of the 12 classic Surya Namaskara poses that are given with the original seed mantras that we see preserved also in Krishnamacharya and in the Bihar school systems of Surya Namaskara, the classical version. Those mantras, again, are Hrang, Hring, Hrung, etc. 6 mantras that are doubled with the second set of 6 poses. So you have mantras that are leading each of the 12 poses, 6 mantras leading the first 6, and then they're doubled again to lead the last 6 poses of what we now know of as classic Surya Namaskara, the same sequence that is shown in the commemorative stamp series to celebrate Surya Namaskara on International Yoga Day. Now, the Raja Bayun tailors this practice, the way he presents it, to the West so that it's palatable to the West. He uses Western terminology. He extracts it from its original tantric ritual teaching or sequence. And he does so, though, with a sensibility of the ancient roots of this practice and repeatedly claims that it is ancient. Despite this, the Western academic world, particularly the field of modern yoga studies, now claims that this is actually the source of Surya Namaskara. That this pamphlet in 1928 is really the first moment in which Surya Namaskara appears on the scene, that it is not an ancient practice, and it is from this pamphlet and other publications like it that Krishnamacharya drew Surya Namaskara, and out of which or from which it has come down to us today. Now, the same poses called dandas or dandavats, duns by Majumdar in his 1950 book, we see here depicted are basically the same or similar sets of poses. And if this is from an ancient tradition, we are then looking for a postural sequence that has the solar seed mantras that are taught with it today, in many cases. We're looking for 12 poses that perhaps may be called duns or dandavats or dandas. And we're looking for a peak pose called Ashtanga Namaskara or Ashtanga Pranama, meaning 8 body parts or points that come to the ground in the culminating moment of the sequence. So with that, we turn now to the Kriyasara proper, going back 600 to 700 years in the same region of India, namely the Maharashtra southwestern area, including Karnataka and Kerala. So the Kriyasara, again, belongs to the Virashaiva lineage, a sublineage of Shaiva Tantra, which still thrives today in Maharashtra and Karnataka, based on the aforementioned Virashaiva Tantras, all of which must have been composed, of course, before Nilakanta's time, and that I would guess date to about 1000 AD based on corroborating evidence. This includes the Amshu Tantra, his primary source. So summarizing the collective teachings of these tantras, these Virashaiva Tantras, Nilakanta gives us a very clear look at what this Surya Namaskara sequence looked like, who was performing it, and what its purpose was. And for this little clip, I'm just going to corroborate or prove that the classic Surya Namaskara sequence as it has come down to us today is indeed the same that was practiced in Maharashtra centuries ago, and all throughout India for that matter. And my book will demonstrate this, proving the antiquity of Surya Namaskara in its 3 daily practices. The 12-part or 12-pose sequence was practiced, as we will see, at the dawn sandhya. And so we turn to the Kriyasara proper and find that Nilakanta calls the Surya Namaskara practice as it is known to us today by several names, including Pranama Vidhi, which means the ritual sequence of prostrating or prostration, the Namaskara Vidhi, Vidhi meaning ritual sequence, the ritual sequence of Namaskara, or Dandavat. And here we have the first clear evidence of these postures generically being called Dands or Dandas. Dandavat Namaskara, the Namaskara performed as a series of Danda poses or bending poses in different angles. So a Danda refers to a specific pose that has some bend or bends in the body. So a bend at one of the 8 points in which the body can bend. So we have, of course, multiple variations of bending that the human body can engage in. So the term Dandavat will become, or has become by this time, by the 14th century, and will continue to be, the primary term for postural yoga itself. And so Nilakanta tells us, next is the auspicious highest postural vehicle, or karana. Karana could just mean pose, and usually refers to a standing posture, of Shiva, the god of all gods. This is called the Dandavat, the most desired ritual sequence, in which one prostrates towards the ground. So what is a Dandavat? The word literally means one who resembles a danda or the shape of a danda. And this, of course, means the yogi who engages in bending postures in a series is called a Dandavat. Say that again. A yogi who engages a series of bending postures, no matter what is bent in the body, but a series of them that are linked together is called a Dandavat. And so we see in his next verse, Samagatya dhrutam vipram pranamya bhuvi dandavat swamin matula putroyam rakshitaha pritui patihi. That self-mastered one who takes the shapes of the Danda, the Dandavat, is proficient in rapidly prostrating towards the earth with dexterity. He is a lord of the earth, meaning a king, a protector of the earth. And who is it that practices this Dandavat sequence? Nidayaitan namaskritya tastau yogi kritanjali. When standing before the lingam, the yogi, with focused awareness, engaged with his hands in Anjali Mudra, meaning before the heart, is to perform namaskara, is to give namas, literally, is to perform namas. Now, here the agent or the practitioner is identified as a yogi, and indeed, this particular practice, Surya Namaskara, forms in this particular text, in all of the Virashaiva Tantras, indeed in all Tantras of the Vishnu-based lineage of Tantra called the Pancharatra, as well as later goddess-worshipping forms of Tantrism. In almost every case, the Surya Namaskara sequence is the 16th of 16 preliminary daily yoga rites known as upachara or adivasa, preliminary rites that precede the primary rites of yoga. And so namaskara then is performed by the yogi and is considered a yogic practice, what we're about to see. Namaskara has been denied as a yoga practice by scholars of modern yoga studies, and here we see direct evidence that is not the case. Indeed, overwhelming evidence when we look at all the tantras in my timeline, all of them ascribe this practice to that of the daily pantantric yoga ritual that is taught in all tantras with some variation, and that has simply not been studied yet, is responsible for the huge gap in our timeline of the history of yoga. Now, the pose to which this refers to, of course, is now known as Pranamasana or Samastitihi. There's various names for it, but it begins with standing before the Murti, going around the mandala and bowing through this sequence of 12 poses at each of the 8 directions. Nilakanta goes on to say, then the gods, beginning with Brahma, are engaged while physically worshipping that greatest of gods, meaning Shiva. This is a cryptic phrase for denoting the 6 solar seed mantras which lead the Namaskara postures. The specific mantras referred to are identified in the Kriyasara's passage on Nyasa, meaning installing mantras on the body, installing mantras on the hand first, then onto the body, and then the body itself becoming a vehicle of mantra, where each limb or step or movement, each pose of the sequence of 12 poses represents or is led by one of these powers, one of these Shaktis of Shiva that is sonic in its expression. And these are namely identified as Hrang, Hring, Hrum, Hrang, Hraung, and Hraha. This is a vinyasa of seed mantras that then lends the term vinyasa, you might say, to the movement of the poses. Any movement of or sequence of mantras is called a vinyasa. This is overwhelmingly common in the tantras, but the term is then appended to the movement of physical poses because these poses are led by mantras. Okay, so this incidentally is definitely why Krishnamacharya refers to the sequencing of poses as a vinyasa. He is purposely leaving out the mantras for the most part, or at least did initially. His student today, Ramaswamy, who still teaches the Surya Namaskara, presents it as taught to him, Ramaswamy, led by the 6 seed mantras. But in general, in public, it seems Krishnamacharya left these out, but he kept the term vinyasa, which really refers to the sequence of the syllables. So, from there, we see that the 6 particular mantras are superintended by each of the 6 major deities associated with this practice. We already saw it with Brahma, the creator god, Vishnu, the sustainer, Rudra, the destroyer, Ishvara, the transcendent aspect of divinity, Sadash, or universal Shiva, and then Mahashiva. So this is Hrang, Hring, Hrung, Hraing, Hraung, Hraha, which guide the poses. Literally, your body becomes a sonic conduit for the Shakti, or the power of Shiva. And here are the mantras rendered in a Kashmiri manuscript in the script, the Sanskrit script of Sharda. So we can deduce so far something that's universal, as it turns out, to all texts, or almost all texts written by the 14th century and certainly thereafter, that the seed mantras that universally lead the 12 poses of Surya Namaskara are these seed mantras: Hrang, Hring, Hrung, Hraing, Hraung, and Hraha. This is what Nilakanta calls the Pranama Vidhi, or the Namaskara Kriya, the prostration sequence, or the physical rite Kriya of Namaskara. And so he tells us, these prostrations correspond to one's own rebirth, and they are to be engaged according to the individual's physical strength, the time of day, and the location of where the practice is engaged. So tailored to one's ability and the time and the place of practice. This is a claim made by Krishnamacharya for engaging asana yoga in general, for which he has been criticized. But this is a standard trope or standard statement I'm finding in all of these texts, that Namaskara is basically a practice that conforms to one's ability. Pranamash chatur vidaha, 4 categories of poses. We see here listed as a summary of what is found in the source Virashaiva text then. 4 categories of poses, not 4 poses, but 4 categories of poses that are extracted and that guide the 12-part sequence. Indeed, they guide all 3 Namaskara practices throughout the day. All of these poses, any pose that is practiced within a Namaskara sequence, can be categorized under one of these 4 rubrics. And they are as follows: the Ashtanga, or 8 body part Namaskara pose, the Panchanga, or 5 body part Namaskara pose, Chaturanga, 3 body part Namaskara pose, or Ekanga, the 1 body part pose. 2 subcategories of the Ashtanga, or 8 body part prostration or pranama, are given. The first is Ashtanga Danda Pranama, staff prostration, Danda prostration, with 8 body parts, and Ashtanga Kevala Pranama, prostration with 8 body parts only. These are our classifications, 4 categories, and then with one of those having 2 subcategories, namely Ashtanga Pranama. So we return now to that Pranamasana pose, or the pose of holding Anjali Mudra before the heart as one begins the sequence. The first pose then belongs to the category of Trianga, a 3 body part pose. This we see clearly depicted in the Sanskrit, Shirasi Hastabhyam Anjali Bandhanam Trianga Namaskara. A 3 body part Namaskara pose includes the hands held together in Anjali, with the head and the 2 hands being the 3 body parts respectively. So 2 hands and the head are the body parts which engage or lead this movement or define this particular pose. Right? So that's the 3 parts. And therefore this category includes the standing pranamasana as we see here. Also includes the backbending pose known commonly today as Hasta Uttanasana and Padahastasana, forward bending pose, 3 parts again being the 2 hands and the head leading the movement. From there we move to the Panchanga Namaskara, the 5 body part prostration, which is taught by the Virashaiva Tantras with numerous variations summarized by Nilakanta. First we have the Panchanga variation, which is akin to variations of embryo pose. Shirasa hastabhyam janubhyam chabhuvam sprshtva kriyamana panchanga. The first panchanga pose delineated is performed by touching the earth with the 2 knees, the 2 hands, and the head, primarily. The hands in this case can be on the knees or not, but the main 5 parts here are the head, the 2 hands, and the 2 knees. An alternate variation, a pakshantaram, is the following, which we now call Balasana, or child's pose. Shira hasto bahu chajanuni nidhaya kriyamanaha panchanga iti pakshantaram. A variation here of panchanga pose, 5 body part pose, is performed with the head, the hands, and the 2 arms stretched out as well as the 2 knees placed upon the earth. Here we see the version of it performed by Prime Minister Modi on International Yoga Day with some 40,000 people behind him engaging in this exact same pose, here given with the description of Nilakanta from circa 1400 AD. That moves us in order, rough order of how these poses would be performed, to the Ashtanga Danda Pranama, the staff prostration with 8 parts. You may recall there were 2 different Ashtanga prostrations, or 8 body part prostrations, 2 subcategories. This is the first, the Danda Pranama. This variation, quote, is performed with both feet, 2 arms, the chest, and the head in alignment with one's gaze and led by the particularly voiced mantra of that pose. In this case, the seed mantra of the sun that applies. And this, of course, is a very preliminary and quite ancient version of what we call today mountain pose or elephant pose, or most commonly downward facing dog. Next we have the second variation of Ashtanga Danda Pranama, the staff prostration with 8 parts, performed specifically with the 2 feet, the 2 knees, with the head raised up off the 2 hands, and by alternating to either side with the mind and the gaze focused. This is what is called in the Bihar school Ashwa Samchalanasana, for example. This is the classic lunge. Yet another variation of Danda Pranama is the classic pose that we think of today as Chaturanga Dandasana. Quote, a Danda prostration can be performed with the uttered mantra and with the head in alignment with both feet, both hands, with both sides of the chest level with the ground. This is explained in other texts clearly as today's Chaturanga Dandasana, but it also can be conceived of as 6 to 12 fingers off the ground, as we see here with Krishnamacharya engaging the pose of the same name. That is to say, variation of Ashtanga Danda Pranama. And then from here we have the Ashtanga Kevala Pranama, prostration with only the 8 body parts. And this, of course, is the classic look of the ultimate pose of the sequence. This is the pose that is referred to in Mumumjar's 1950 Encyclopedia. This, of course, is the culminating act of devotion and the pivoting or pivotal pose of the 12-part sequence, in which one's mind becomes completely dissolved, chittavritti nirodha, in this engaged devotion where the mind itself has no distraction because its complete focus, its complete job is to engage the poses, the mantras, the verses, and the movements that are particular to the sequence. And so it dissolves away so that when one rises once again out of this pose in what is called Ekanga Namaskara, one body part Namaskara, that ascent back up to standing position is one in which the divinity that one has been worshiping has become oneself, and that consubstantiation or unification of divine and devotee is complete. And so here is the Ekanga Namaskara pose, better known today as Bhujangasana. And so that moves us to Ekanga Namaskara pose, which is one body part specifically defined as the movement led by the head curling up with the hips, the hands, and the elbows and arms in support of this movement as described in the subsequent passage. This is, of course, Bhujangasana as it is known today, and is considered to be the first moment of rebirth of a child learning to walk, as well as the serpent look, so that one is ascending back to standing in a state of exhilarated unity consciousness, one with the very divine that they've prostrated towards. And so, ready to perform the rest of the daily yoga rites, we step forward into our power. And so we return then to our commemorative stamp series issued by the Indian government from International Yoga Day in celebration, as exclaimed, of Surya Namaskara and Vinyasa-based yoga as India's ancient heritage. Indeed it is, as this Kriyasara passage from the medieval period has shown us. And this is a passage which gives the Danda-based poses in their most rudimentary sense, but it is these Danda poses that will be eventually extrapolated into a much more intricate Namaskara practice in the text that we see listed in my Namaskara timeline that follow the Kriyasara. Indeed, the names today that we know these poses as, many of them begin to show up as early as the 14th century, such as Bhujangasana, and in all of the lineages of Tantra, as Namaskara grows to become the core practice of Hathayoga as described in the earliest Tantras of the Vaishnava lineages, and then eventually in the great Rudra Yamala Tantra itself. This is India's heritage, and this is our ancient heritage for all those who practice Surya Namaskara and asana-based vinyasa today. And this will be the focus of my book, an anthology in which students can discover their own heritage through many, many passages that I'll be exploring in this groundbreaking work.